Cambridge, the editor-in-chief of the Nonprofit Quarterly, and I'm so glad to welcome you all to this webinar on governance in the new empowered stakeholder environment. It's one of the more exciting webinars we've done this year, not that they aren't all exciting. But before I get started, I want to just tell you something about our sponsor, because you are all here gratis today because our sponsor paid the freight. So thank you very much to Network for Good. Network for Good, as many of you may know, offers innovative donation and peer fundraising software for nonprofits, plus the expertise, training, and support to drive successful online fundraising campaigns. The other thing I want to remind you of before we get started is there is a hashtag that you can use to tweet out the brilliant things that people will say during the webinar. So that is hashtag NPGovernance. Please feel free to use that like crazy because we want to begin to spread the knowledge that's developed here in these webinars far and wide. A few simple logistics. If you're having trouble with your audio or video, just go back to your original invite. It will tell you what to do. You can also, obviously, try to ask us a question, but it will be, it's probably just wiser to go about looking real quickly about how do you get back in. That said, all of that boring stuff said, I want to go on to the more exciting stuff of the actual topic of this webinar. The idea behind this webinar really emerges from a trend that is evident across all three sectors. That is the trend of stakeholders deciding that they have parted ways with a governance body. And that can happen in for-profit organizations, in a government, and in nonprofit organizations. The fact is that now in the new digital environment, where stakeholder groups used to be fairly separated from one another, they're now very able to get in touch with one another quickly and organize themselves around common cause. That creates a very different environment for governance. I want to just describe a couple of examples in the different sectors. In the for-profit sector, you may or may not know about an incident that happened in New England with a corporation called Market Basket, which is, it's a chain of grocery stores. And the board decided it wanted to unseat the CEO, who was very kind of beloved by the employees. And what happened was that the employees went up in arms, and right after that, the customers kind of created common cause with them. Essentially, everybody boycotted the store to the extent that the board had to back up and withdraw itself and turn the back over to the original CEO. It took months. The corporation lost millions, but it was a very successful effort. Though one of the things that I remember most about it is, because it happened in my area, is that the customers were actually out on the picket lines with the employees, and they would take where they had shopped in another store, they would take their receipts and tape it up on the windows of the stores, which I thought was great. So there was just covered in receipts from other stores. In the government sector, you might have noticed it in Indiana, when Indiana passed the religious freedom law. And it wasn't only residents of that state, but it was actually people who did business with residents of that state who declared that they would no longer do business in that state if that wasn't reconsidered, because it was considered to be a kind of an inroad to discrimination against LGBT people. In nonprofits, there are any number of these kinds of examples. So we've seen Susan G. Komen for the Cure boycotted by half of their constituency. And they have also lost millions over the past number of years because they made a decision that violated the value set of half of their constituents, which was to defund Planned Parenthood. There have been any number of other examples like that, but the one that we're going to take up today is, the two that we're going to take up today are particularly fascinating. They're the cases of, and they're not just cases, but full-on organizations. They're the cases of the San Diego Opera and Sweet Briar College. The reason why we wanted to take up these cases is because to some extent they're very similar in that the boards of each one of these organizations decided that they were going to close the entity down. They did so fairly quickly, precipitously, and the stakeholders rose up and took the institution back. That then created a situation in which governance had to be rewritten. That people had to rethink, what do we do in terms of having governance that really is inclusive of the people that care about this organization. And so, having said that, I want to, we're going to hear in short some of the stories of each one of these two places. So I'll introduce the three panelists actually now. The first is Vernetta Walker, who's Vice President of Program and Chief Governance Officer at BoardSource. And Vernetta and I have been talking about this phenomenon for quite some time, and so she's going to help me talk with the two panelists who have actually had this experience. The second is Carol Lazier, who's the president of the San Diego Opera Board of Directors. Carol was on the board, actually, when it made the decision to close, and is one of the surviving members. And so she'll talk to us a little bit about that case. And then Teresa Tomlinson, who is the mayor of Columbus, Georgia, but also the chairwoman of the board of Sweet Briar College. So what I'd like to do is just ask maybe you first, Carol, to talk a little bit, give us about 5 or 10 minutes of what happened exactly at Sweet Briar. How did the board come to this decision to give up?
Okay, first of all, it's the opera. You got them reversed.
Oh, what did I say?
Okay.
I'm sorry. San Diego Opera, sorry.
Easy to do. We're so similar, I'm not surprised. I'll give you a little background on San Diego Opera. We are one of the top tier operas in the United States. We are known for artistic excellence, wonderful products, good leadership, financial, fiscal responsibility. We were ranked, had the top ranking at the Commission of Arts and Culture with San Diego. Anyway, we're very, very reputable and kind of wonderful arts organization in San Diego. Now, on March the 3rd, we had a normal board meeting. Everything was, you know, as we'd heard before. We had a wonderful product. We were planning our next season. We're planning our 50th anniversary season. We had problems. We needed to raise some money, the normal stuff. Then, in the meantime, the management had taken some action unbeknownst to the board, things like suspending our season brochure announcement and stopping our membership campaign, and cash flow ceased. On March 19th, we were called into an emergency board meeting, and at that point in time, the management, backed up by 2 attorneys, said that what we needed to do is close the opera. There was no way we could raise the money. There was no way we could put on the 50th anniversary season. What we needed to do is close our doors, pay off all our obligations, future obligations, to be done. And they felt that was to die with dignity. They felt that was the way to handle this. So that was first an executive committee. The executive committee this hit us like we were so surprised, but it was a very persuasive argument backed by attorneys, and so we voted, yes, we will close the opera. So then immediately we went into general session with the rest of the board, and we were given the same talk, and the board voted 33 to 1 to close the opera. Now, this is really interesting because there were pre-prepared press releases that were embargoed to go out later on that day, and there were pre-prepared resolutions put forth with us with all the legal language that all we had to do was sign. So we signed that, done deal. Okay, so then we were all just totally amazed. We were blown away. The community was really angry. The press was angry. Everybody rose up and started to, everybody was just so very confused. So then on March 20th, we had our next performance, which was the Verdi Requiem. And we had one performance after this, and after that we were going to close our doors. In the meantime, we had, as I said, a huge uprising of people in the community. We had the White Knight Committee, which was a newly formed committee of employees. We had the membership, or a membership organization. The membership decided that they were going to rebel, and this was not right. The press was angry as can be. We were getting, people were just so upset. So then on March 31st, we had another meeting, and at that point in time, a number of board members that had really taken a second look at this and thought, what the heck have we done, started getting together and meeting. And we decided that it was really important that we consider some other alternatives to ceasing operations. So at that point in time, Mark Skorka, who's the president of Opera America, came in and gave a talk. We made the board listen to him. He told us that we did not fit the profile of a struggling opera company. We had assets, we had no debt. It just didn't make any sense. So we were able to talk the board into voting to postpone the cease of operations for 2 weeks. All right. In the meantime, we hired Kevin Smith, who was another consultant who came in and looked at our budget, just went through with a fine-tooth comb and found ways we could cut our season, we could cut our budget, and we actually could continue and have our 50th anniversary season. On April 11th, we had another special board meeting where we had attorneys there again. There was just incredible conversation about liability. People were worried they were going to get sued. It was quite an interesting and spirited meeting. At that point, we started having board members resigning because they were afraid to continue on the board. On April 17th, this fellow Kevin Smith came in and made his presentation on how we could cut our budget, cut our season, and produce fine opera for our 50th season and onward. This was presented, and we had a motion to extend once again the cease operations, see if we could raise the money to actually make this happen. At that point, our president walked out of the room, and a large number of board members signed their pre-prepared resignations that they were no longer going to be board members.
There were a lot of preparations going on in the background.
Anyway, in the meantime, we were having special town hall meetings with the community, with people in the opera world were explaining how things worked and new models of running companies, new ways of producing opera, that this was a possibility. We had an online campaign. White Knight started an online campaign. There were online petitions signed, all sorts of things. And, and the press continued to be very, very angry. We needed to raise some money fast, so we started a crowdfunding campaign and raised $2.3 million in a little over a couple of weeks. Social media was absolutely incredible. So on April 28th, after all these people had walked out, we had another meeting. And actually, April 28th was a membership meeting where the membership told us they didn't want us to sell the company. They wanted us to rescind the vote to cease operations, and they wanted the people in charge to be removed because they had no faith in their leadership. So let's see. At that point, we elected new officers. I was the president by default because I was the last person standing. And then on May 6th, we had another special meeting with the board of directors and continued to look at our crowdfunding. On May 16th, we had another special meeting of the board of directors, which was now 26 people down from 50, or 24 people down from 56, and we voted to rescind the cease operations. And then a couple days later, we announced it. And there you go. Since then, we've hired a general director, a new wonderful general director. We've put on a very successful 50th anniversary season, and things, it's always a challenge when you're in the arts and nonprofit, but things seem to be going quite well.
Yeah. So I'm going to go from that story, and I think the listeners will be, the viewers will be surprised at the similarities between these two stories. And we'll go to Teresa Tomlinson. One of the samenesses between these two stories is that in the background of what was going on at the San Diego Opera, there was this intoning across the country about opera being dead. Um, and there are a lot of doomsayers around. And the same thing is actually true in the sphere of same-sex colleges as well. A lot of intoning about how those institutions are doomed. But maybe you can take us through what it was that happened at Sweet Briar and that whole kind of cliff-jumping story.
Sure. Well, thank you, Ruth, and thank you to Nonprofit Quarterly for giving us this opportunity, because it is tremendous. I mean, it's absolutely identical, just another name, a different type of organization. But on March 3rd, 2015, our interim president, and emphasis on the word interim, he'd been in office for about 7 months, announced that Sweet Briar College would close in just a few short months. That there would be teach-out agreements with other schools. So, of course, there had been months and months of planning for this moment. The stakeholders were completely caught off guard. I considered myself an engaged stakeholder, an alumni of the college, and we had no notice, no hint among the faculty, the staff, the alumni, or the students. Sweet Briar College is located in Central Virginia. It's a residential, rural, liberal arts college for women. It's been around for 114 years. It is very proud, of course, of its history, but also its product, in that the women it graduates do tend to excel in their particular field. They're very engaged in their community, and they're well steeped in leadership. And so it is a network of about 16,000 living alumni across the country. Interestingly, some of the basis for closing the college was that enrollment was down and that the college was unable to raise funds. Just right off the bat, that struck us as being odd, because our largest incoming census had been in 2007 and then again in 2008. And in 2006, we had just completed a $110 million fundraising campaign, which is sizable for a college basically of 650, 700 women. We had a $90 million endowment at the time, and so it was very difficult to follow the logic of the financial pressure to close. Immediately, and within the first few days, I would say, there was some quite favorable press as the story of the interim president, and particularly the chair of the board at the time, was that they were doing right by Sweet Briar. They were euthanizing, if you will, the college, giving it a dignified end, allowing it to close out with its reputation intact without things such as bankruptcy or not being able to fulfill their obligations. And so there was this real sense that there was some sort of financial urgency. Interestingly, on a personal side note, I had been asked to give the 2015 commencement speech, which now looked as if it was going to be the final commencement speech of this great institution. And just 20 days prior, my husband and I had signed a $1 million testamentary gift letter to the college and had received a very kind thank you note from the interim president thanking me for my gift to future generations of Sweet Briar women. And so what happened is an immediate result of this shock, and it sent a shock throughout the entire country, not just to the alumni, but I think it fit into a narrative that was happening nationwide, questioning the relevancy of liberal arts institutions, questioning the relevancy of women's education, and so there was a lot of chatter about it across the country. Also the fact that Sweet Briar had 3,300 acres of land at its disposal, certainly a great resource. The $90 million endowment. If a college like Sweet Briar had to close its doors, well, there were dozens of colleges across the country that by that matrix would be in peril. And so it really sent shivers, I think, at the spine of higher education across the country. What happened as immediate result was there was a mighty force awakened in our alumni, our students, our faculty, and other stakeholders. They took immediately to Facebook. The media, after the initial few days of hearing these well-prepared, as Carol stated, ours was well-prepared. There were lawyers purportedly in the room at the time the board made this decision. But after that initial few days of perhaps a honeymoon period, if you will, of this type of announcement, the media began to scrutinize the basis for the purported closure, and there were a lot of holes in some of the representations being made. But interestingly, the first people to take the field, if you will, were the alumni from the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. And I think they particularly jumped into the fray because, first of all, they represented 3 decades of women who had choice in selection of their higher education institution. By that time, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, certainly all 50 states' university systems were co-ed. So anyone who chose to go to Sweet Briar at that time chose it because it was their first choice, not because they could not get in to another institution, to a co-ed or all-male institution. And secondly, most of the women in those particular decades were at the pinnacle of their careers. So they certainly knew and traded on every day the value of the Sweet Briar education. And so the basis for the closure of the college rang particularly hollow to that legion of alumni. We fought it actually on several fronts. To contrast just slightly from Carol's story, there was an action filed by the county attorney under Virginia law. The county attorney had standing to bring an action raising issues of violation of the Virginia Charitable Gift Act, which made me and many others witnesses because the college was soliciting gifts up until the day they announced closure. And under the Virginia Charitable Gift Act, you cannot solicit a donation for a charitable purpose you know cannot be fulfilled. Also, Sweet Briar had a very long history dating back at least to the 60s of it being declared in the courts as being a trust. And when it integrated, for instance, in the 1963, there was actually had to be a court action filed and an order from the court received to allow Sweet Briar College to integrate, because unlike a normal education institution that's simply a nonprofit, we were had been created by a will, a testamentary gift, and that had a particular treatment under Virginia law that required an order of the court to in any way change its mission or other specified elements of that trust. It also invoked, which by the way, through the legal action, we ultimately did go up to the Virginia Supreme Court on an emergency appeal, and were very favorably treated there, and then ultimately back in the lower courts. We simultaneously were carrying on an active mediation with the Virginia Attorney General. The reason for that was that under the charitable and trust law of the state, he had certain duties and obligations. So his office became, and it became quite a political firestorm, as you might imagine. His office became very engaged in an attempted solution. We also raised in 110 days $28.5 million and converted that $28.5 million, a part of it that was due in the first year of pledges, some $13 million to cash. So it was a very extraordinary fundraising effort. We were able to convert that to reality, not just pledges. And in that, we were able to meet the terms of the Attorney General's mediation and settlement. Also, as a result, the interim president and the entire board tendered their resignations, and a new board was put in place with a new president, President Phil Stone, who had been the president of Virginia Bar, president of Bridgewater College, and had quite a resume, and also had been chairperson of SACS. So we hit the ground running on July 6th. We had about 30 days to get our students back. Most of them, as you can imagine, had made other plans. We did get about over 40% of our students back, and got all new senior staff, put our faculty and our staff back to work, and opened the doors on time and with actually no hiccups. So other than the major hiccup in March and throughout the legal battles of the summer, the actual opening of the doors by comparison was no problem.
Whew. I know.
Remarkable.
Let me just ask one other question. Both of you have mentioned having networks that really kind of worked with you. You both had, at the point that the press understood that the stakeholders were not behind the action, you both had an incredible amount of press, and pretty favorable to those of you who are trying to save it. But you also had some very, I'm not going to say odd, but your network included some very unusual members. In your case, for instance, Carol, it included the union, the musicians union. It included, can you talk a little bit about what other stakeholders involved themselves in the network?
Right. Besides the union, the opera deals with 5 unions, and those unions were involved with the White Knight Committee, as I said. We also had local arts organizations who were very angry at this. They had no idea we were suffering, and they would love to have come forward and helped us before we tried to implode. Other stakeholders would be the membership, as I said, which are anybody that donates $100 or less, or $100 or more could be a member of our organization and has voting rights at the general meeting once a year. Other stakeholders, just community members, opera lovers at large. We had the opera community at large just really rallied around us, Opera America being one of them, but also at least all the major opera companies and smaller opera companies in the United States, Dallas Opera, Opera Philadelphia, and so forth. They came forward to help us. They were stakeholders. I'm trying to think of who else. There's just like the entire community pretty much was really wanted this to succeed. There were not very many people supporting the people that wanted to close the opera. It didn't feel right to anybody, because you hear at one point it's this fabulous organization, all of a sudden you're going to throw in the towel.
Right.
That
Yeah, very much the same circumstance, other than, of course, the alumni, the students, the faculty, which I've already mentioned, but the community of Amherst and Lynchburg, the whole state of Virginia really rose up. Of course, we get students from all across the country, but it also became sort of this litmus test for whether or not there's still a need for liberal arts education in the country today, because everybody is so excited talking about STEM and STEAM, and as if there's just no need for liberal arts education. I think it fit into a particular narrative that began to trouble people greatly. I don't think anyone who's excited about STEM or STEAM ever thought it would result in the death of liberal arts colleges. And so there was really, I think it was a shot across the bow to all higher education. Do we really want the pendulum to swing this far? So we got tremendous help from other women's colleges. I have to give credit, of course, where credit's due, to Hollins College, who stood by us. We also had Agnes Scott in Atlanta, offering to take our students in the early days, and then when we ultimately won, facilitating our students coming back to us. Hollins returning our junior year abroad program to us, which is one of the oldest, or the oldest in the country, and Lynchburg College returning our premier equestrian program back to us, which Sweet Briar is a signature program for Sweet Briar. And so really it became, again, a national symbol of the mission of many, many colleges, and they all stepped forward to join the discussion about the importance of colleges like Sweet Briar.
And I think that was the same situation at the San Diego Opera, as it became almost this test case about, no, this is not the narrative we want to support, right?
Right. Yeah, but opera companies are going belly up right and left, and to have a major opera company in San Diego going out of business was just not okay. That's really helped us rally support.
Right.
Ruth, you can probably imagine I'm dying to jump in here.
Oh, go for it.
As these are some incredible stories, and a real testament to leadership as well. But for me, a person who focuses on governance day in and day out, I think there's so many lessons here and an opportunity perhaps for you to provide some advice and guidance to those who are listening to this webinar. And one of the first things that really struck me by both of your stories was the fact that this came as a complete surprise. It came out just out of the blue, at least from where you were sitting. And I know one of the things that we talk about at BoardSource day in and day out is operating in an environment of no surprises, and that's between the board and the chief executive. So what would you share with others that, whether it's telltale signs or just, lessons learned, you don't have to go into the details of what was shared with you, but like I said, you both expressed that it was a surprise, and boards shouldn't be surprised like this, not at this level, not with this much at stake. So what would you say to those who are on the webinar?
Well, I'll start out by saying the power structure was flipped in our organization. The management managed the board, not the board. The board didn't manage the management. And there was also a huge concentration of power in the executive committee. And there was, it was a vanity board. I mean, lovely people on it, but a lot of people that really didn't understand how boards work. I didn't either until I became president, what really governance meant, how you needed to really understand problems, just not know about them. So I would say that. Teresa, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would say, of course, first of all, contrary to the situation that Carol had, where she was actually there on that day, no board member who was there on the day that they voted to close the college is still around for us to speak to. And because of the litigation, of course, they lawyered up pretty quickly. They had voted to increase their D&O, directors and officers insurance, to, I think it was $28 million or something. Clearly, they were concerned about some sort of personal liability, and so there was radio silence in very large part from those who were on the board. But what we can tell and recreate from some of the documents we can see, and some of the information that obviously just naturally leaks out eventually, is it was very much the same thing. There were some people in the room who this was their first board meeting. Those who had challenged the inversion of power, if you will, had either left out of frustration or been forced out, if you believe the way they characterize it. And so you really had those who were more of a capitulating personality. You had, again, as has been reported, most of the power was put into the executive committee, and really just a few of those worked very closely with the president and the chair, and then a few senior staff, but they kept this locked down very, very tight. I think they, again, trying to imagine what was going through their minds and justify why they would have handled it this way. I think they felt like they were protecting the reputation of the college somehow by not letting this information of a troubled, forward-looking trend. Now, don't forget, that's what it was. The college was not in imminent danger of having to close its doors or not being able to pay the light bill. They had plenty of money to carry on for a few years, even if nothing else changed. But the trends they did not like, they felt were troubling, and so they wanted to get out while the getting was good. And I think at least I imagine they were trying to protect the reputation of Sweet Briar from that kind of information leaking out. And so they kept it very insular, and the board clearly felt like they could not, again, at least from some of the documents and information we have and can piece together, that they couldn't or weren't in a position to throw out the president or senior staff and sort of take over, if you will, by hiring somebody new who would come in with a different vision and different administrative style. So they didn't want to go to that ultimate point of their ultimate authority, and felt they had no options.
And I think in our case, the board was so complacent. We have our general director is fabulous. He could identify beautiful voices. He put together great ensembles. He put again a fabulous artistic product. And I think as board members, we just kind of assumed that he knew best. And so when this was offered to us, we just kind of decided that was the way to go.
So, and most of our information, Ruth, just interestingly, comes from those people who had resigned from the board just prior to all this happening. And so that's where most of our information comes from, related to the tone in the board, some of the going on in the board, and how it was being run.
Okay. Carol, you mentioned the fact that you were on the board, and you said kind of jokingly that you were one of the last people standing, and that's how you became chair of the board. But I picked up on that because recently BoardSource did some research with Wells Fargo, and one of our findings, and it was a statistically significant finding, was that women feel a stronger sense of responsibility for the boards that they serve on. So we had a much higher percentage of women saying that they strongly agree. I feel a sense of responsibility to the board, and I'm a champion for this organization in the community. And Teresa, although you weren't on the board at the time, I mean, Ruth and I, what we're looking at are two strong women. So what are your thoughts about this, that we had two women really come to the rescue of these organizations?
Well, that's interesting. We had, for the first time in the college's history, a male president and a male chairman, and that, of course, was not lost on any of the stakeholders of this women's college. And so, you know, there was a lot of chatter about that. I will say that all but one of the other board members was female and was an alumni of college. And so that there was a good bit of discussion on Facebook and social media about the betrayal that those of us who were sort of left in this wake felt about that vote. But I think, again, that either over time, you know, I think it is a difficult proposition when the executive administrator has lost the faith in the mission, and the board is really put in a position of, what are you going to do? Come in and take over. I mean, you know, we all know now, Carol now knows what it takes to, you know, throw out, if you will, the administrative leadership of an organization and bring it in. It is a full-time plus job. And so I think that boards were very hesitant about that. But yes, right now our makeup, interestingly, is we have 20 board members, and 14 are women, 14 are alumni. And the rest are men who are devoted to liberal arts education and single-sex institutions. And, of course, our president is a male.
I'd say our board is pretty evenly split, and I think a women's college is a little different than an arts organization. You can be strong as a man or a woman. It just depends what the situation is.
Well, you know, let me move for a second. You guys, as you came in as chair of the board of each one of these boards, you came into a stakeholder environment who now believes that they were a part of saving this institution and therefore should have a say in its future, right? And so I'd like to hear just a little bit of the considerations in the way that you govern the institution. What have you written into kind of your governance style that is inclusive of those stakeholder networks, and how has that changed your image of governance?
Well, you can't put this toothpaste back in the tube. This has happened. It's affected everybody's life, and the alumni have been awakened, and they demand, obviously, and the students demand after the shock and to their life, as well as the faculty, demand to have a hand in this. And so I think we see that as a very good thing. It's just a matter of tweaking the governance organization to allow for that outlet. And one of the ways we've done it is through reforming our alumni association to be much more engaged, to have a visioning aspect. There had been something during the process called Sweet Briar 2.0, which was basically a think tank Facebook page where women were coming from across the country, putting in their thoughts about what Sweet Briar should do to become more financially healthy, to have better enrollment, and so forth. And so that it was such a rich resource for us that we certainly didn't want to lose it once we got back up and on our feet and in a more healthy and normal governing capacity. And so we have reformed our alumni association to specifically be able to receive that information, process that information, and then they will be reporting regularly to the board. We've already had, we're going to be having a town hall meeting in February, but we already have regular lunches and breakfasts and other type meetings with the students and the faculty, and regular conversation with the alumni. So, you know, I think really there's the internet, frankly, has brought about a connectedness, a populism, if you will, to stakeholders of all different kinds of organizations, and the organizations that are going to prosper and be healthy in the future are going to be those that see that as a resource and find a way to receive and deal with that information. It can't drive the train, but it certainly can go into the process and be, again, a mighty source for the organization that can help craft and design your vision and your future.
Right, and for us, one of the first things we did is rewrite our bylaws to restrict the power of the executive committee and make them more accountable to the rest of the board and the community in general. I think the other thing we've done that's really important is we've become a listening organization rather than somebody that says, we know what you need, you know, we know what to present to you, we know best. So we've become a listening organization. Our new general director is doing listening tours, meeting with all the stakeholders, the community at large, and listening to what they have to say, and incorporating that in our future strategic planning. And once again, we started a new strategic plan that is governed and directed by our new, we wrote our mission statement, our core values, and our vision statement. So everything is going that right direction.
So I love these steps that you've outlined.
Doing a listening tour as well. So I think that's a very common thing that can bridge that gap between where the stakeholders are now and where we need them to be part of a healthy, functioning organization.
Right. The other thing with us, the other stakeholder group that I forgot to mention, which is critically important, is our staff. Our entire staff, the people that weren't laid off, stayed. And we're changing the corporate culture so it's not top management down. The people actually have a say and they're listened to.
Which I think is amazing, because your staff really involved themselves in the attempt to save the opera. They were very active, and the same is true at Sweet Briar. And that creates a different governance environment, in that now you have staff who are part of kind of external stakeholder bodies,
right.
Internal, external stakeholder bodies, and that's very unusual, I think.
I think the other thing that's important is we were not encouraged to get to the staff. There was a real barrier between the staff and the board, and that we kind of operated in silos. So that is completely broken down, and we know our staff and appreciate our staff, and they know us, and there's open communication between the two groups of people, which is very healthy.
I'm sorry, Carol, I'm having trouble realizing when you're done. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm done. Your turn.
But it is, you know, there's a lot of course, just general nonprofit governance, and then there's organizations like Sweet Briar that is also governed by other organizations such as SACS, right? And so we have to be very careful about these so-called, you know, silos and how exactly they're functioning, because it could bring into question accreditation, and other colleges and universities would have the same situation. So how do you give power of voice to your faculty? How do you allow them to have direct access to the board, for instance, so that they can know if there's a problem for the administration without upsetting those silos? So we are working our way through that. We are redoing our bylaws, obviously. We are already had a presentation from SACS to talk about this and other type issues. But one thing that we started doing right now in the interim is more social events, tailgatings, lunches, breakfasts with the community, with the faculty, having direct conversations with them, with the president and the senior staff there. Just a familiarity, a relationship building circumstance. And then, of course, I think, and you'll probably get to this in a future question, so I'll elaborate more then, but, you know, the board does have powers other than just firing the president, and And so there are things that the board can do in requesting inquiry, requesting reports back to the board, and certainly providing direction. Now, if the president chooses to ignore the direction or in his or her judgment go in another, down another path, certainly that's allowable under most of these governing standards. But the board then, of course, can review the president for his or her performance.
Yeah, so you definitely raise a good question. I think a lot of boards struggle with how much information they want to get from staff, and also they sometimes struggle with what they really should be keeping their eye on as the governing board. I think a lot of the steps that you've talked about, both you, Carol and Teresa, you're looking at that level of accountability and transparency for the external stakeholders as well as the internal stakeholders. I have a question for you, Teresa, specifically. A lot of work was done to really regain, well, like you said, to bring your students back because many of them had made arrangements. You have, you're still working on, you know, what will our bylaws look like and the listening tour, etc. But here's my question. Is it all the right, while you're taking all the right steps, is it too late from a reputation standpoint? One of the case studies that Ruth mentioned in the beginning in her opening remarks was Susan G. Komen. And while they certainly did not go out of existence in terms of their fundraising levels, they have struggled for years to get back to a point that they were at several years ago. So when I think about students, and it might be too early to tell. We know right now we're in that period where high school seniors are all sending off their applications. Do you think you're going to have any trouble drawing the pool because reputation is such an important resource for nonprofit organizations?
Well, a couple things. One, I think the silver lining in this horribly dark cloud that was forced upon us is that we received national media exposure. And so there were people who had never heard of Sweet Briar that now became fascinated with Sweet Briar. The other thing was because it mobilized our 16,000 living alumni, people didn't realize that those remarkable women in their community were Sweet Briar graduates. And Sweet Briar graduates weren't wearing it on their sleeve. Now they are, and now they're making it perfectly clear that they're the woman they are, the leader they are, the business owner they are, because of the college that they went to, Sweet Briar College. So I think it's actually having, and it is too early to tell, but it's actually appears to be having the opposite effect, which people have become incredibly intrigued. Women's colleges, the appeal does vacillate with, I mean, you know, like I said, we had some of our highest enrollment in 2007, 2008. It dipped a bit, was coming back up then when all this happened. But right now we have twice the number of direct applications we had this time, anytime for the last 8 to 10 years. And so these aren't the Common App applications. These are the direct sweetbriarcollege.edu or sbc.edu applications that are coming in, which shows us that people are purposefully selecting that website and then purposely filling out our application for consideration, which is not something we have seen before. So you're right, it's too early to tell, but I will say anecdotally, we're also, of course, now attending, we've had over, I think it's 150 alumni have attended, in addition to our staff, have attended college fairs throughout the country. That was not happening before. And so now you see our breadth of coverage is much broader, and we're seeing the direct result applications coming in from those contacts, and that's what we think bodes well for us, but it is at this time too early to tell.
You know, Carol, let me pick up on that for a second and ask you also, is there anything that has been significantly added to what you have at hand as a result of this crisis and recovery?
Added as in terms of evolution as an organization?
Yeah.
Well, I can say, well, the opera community in general is having really hard times. The opera companies that are thriving are doing new and interesting programming. They're doing less expensive operas and so forth. And we were only doing fully staged, very expensive grand opera. And there was no nobody seemed to want to change that model. So I think what's come out of this is we realize we have to be nimble, we have to be clever, we have to find the new ways of producing opera, we have to find things that resonate in our community. And if we don't, we'll be gone. But we are, so we're here. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. So for other organizations that don't want to wait on a crisis to become more innovative and to adapt and see the opportunities that might be right in front of them, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, look at other organizations that are thriving in your area. If we looked, well, actually we did have a strategic planning committee that was shut down back in the fall of 2013, which was going that direction, and it was very threatening. So I think if we had started actually changing our business model and really taking a good hard look at where we were going and that it wasn't sustainable, our business model was not sustainable, then we would have made these changes earlier. We may have not been able to because the leadership that was in place was so strong. So in this case, NearDeath Experience was a very good thing because we didn't have to turn around and retool. So,
well, the NearDeath Experience ended up being a very good thing for us, but my goodness, it cost us tens of millions of dollars. And so, you know, who knows? Had they come forward and announced that Sweet Briar College was in some sort of financial peril as they perceived it, or was in such a negative trend the college needed to close, I guess it would have been best all of this would have happened without us having to lose our students and all of the things that I've stated that created such a pit, really, that we then had to and have climbed out of in a very large part. But I would say to boards that you are a tremendous resource. If you think that you are a member of a board just to establish a quorum and take up space, then you need to get off that board. You need to have a burning passion for the boards that you serve on. You need to be inquisitive and intrigued by the things going on with the organization. You need to ask for information, ask for presentations, get the administration in the habit of wanting to brag to you about what they're doing good and wanting to share with you some of their challenges in order to partake of the expertise around the table. So do everything you can to create an atmosphere of engagement by using your own passion and your own questioning mind to have that type of engagement with the administration. It should not be, in fact, it's interesting, I received a questionnaire from I won't mention it, but a university asking me to rank our president on various things. It obviously was a mass questionnaire, and I was stunned by the questions because the questions almost presumed that the board members in large part were potted plants, and as if the only role of the board is to either fire or hire the president, and otherwise you're just sitting around waiting for the president to retire or to resign. So, you know, I don't buy into that. I think you're there for a reason, I hope, and I hope that you can find a way consistent with good board governance and whatever other organizations or entities oversee and govern your organization to be highly engaged.
I think it's really it's the responsibility of the leaders of the board and the management to get together and really educate board members on, number one, what is governance, and number two, what, you know, just the nuts and bolts of governing, because lots of people on boards, especially on art boards, have not been on other nonprofit boards or business boards, and they really don't understand the responsibilities and what they're there for.
You know, and oftentimes in selecting board members, they look for people who are monetarily very generous, and so they get these boards where the people are certainly willing to write big checks, but they're not particularly engaged in wanting to be a part of the solution, and they either don't have time for that or they have other priorities in their life. And so when you're choosing your board members, I think you need to be very careful to choose somebody that has a burning passion for their organization.
And strategic choices as well, to plug holes in your board. You need skill sets. You need a great variety of skill sets to have a really good functioning board.
You know, what's fascinating to me about both of these stories is that both institutions had a very rich, very deep supportive mechanism that neither one of them understood before this all happened. You now have a lot of that exposed to you. And it's almost this larger governance environment in which the board is sitting in the middle, and in some way has to make use of, because now you can see it, it's there. What does that feel like? Does it feel more powerful? Does it feel confusing? How does that feel at this point?
Does it feel scary?
Scary?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I think it feels very comfortable and exhilarating.
Yeah.
So.
I think well, there's a huge responsibility. You're going to have to listen to a lot of people and be accountable to a lot of stakeholders. So, but it is exhilarating. It's exciting, and yeah.
Great. Any last words for our participants? I know you feel that there's a future of governance in all of this, Teresa. Do you want to say anything about that?
Sure.
Again, I want to remind people she's also a mayor, so she knows governance.
Yeah, right. Well, we're seeing the same thing in the public sector, frankly. It's that sort of the death of the old way of doing things, where there might have been political party bosses who were surrogates for the masses, and as long as you got the party bosses in line, then that's all you needed to do, because they would take care of delivering the constituencies. Those days are long behind us. People want direct access to their leaders, and so you see the exact same thing happening here in the nonprofit world. And I think that to the extent that leaders in these nonprofit organizations see their stakeholders as nipping at their heels or causing them too much time or trouble, they are really denying themselves their biggest resource. And you need to find leadership that feels very comfortable with being accessible, or at least will create a structure, have senior staff or others that are very comfortable with providing direct access to the administrative power, if you will, of the organization for all of the stakeholders. And if you don't do that, the world's going to leave you behind, because that's where the world is right now. And it's such a tremendous resource. People should get busy harnessing it and finding out what the right organizational structure is to bring all of that energy into the organization in an appropriate way where it helps and doesn't hinder.
Well said.
If I had more board members like you, you really make my job easy. I just feel like I need to have a short little video clip with the last 5 minutes or the last 10 minutes and just play that for boards across the country.
So thank you, both of you, Carol and Teresa, and thank you, Vernetta, great partner, helping us do this. And we will be talking to you soon. I think we probably will be talking to these two women soon as well. Maybe revisit in another little bit and find out what's going on. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and we will be seeing you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.